All right, well, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Pam Bro. Pam has been a friend of mine. I've known you for, God, at least the last 30 years. Pam, you remind me so much of your father, Harmon Bro, because I heard him speak back in the 70s at the area, and he had this big, bright smile and this dynamic personality, passionate, enthusiastic, and you got his gene. I asked Pam what she'd like me to tell you today about her, and she says, so I wrote down a few things. She says she's been in this area the past 35 years as a minister of both the United Church of Christ and the Disciples of Christ. She's founded 2 churches in Virginia Beach. The last one was called Living Water Sanctuary. She's been an ARE speaker all these years and teacher. She's the author of a book called A Trail Guide to Life, which I think we all need to read, probably. It's on Amazon.com if you'd like to purchase it.
Yeah, it's Soul Quest. Soul Quest, A Trail Guide to Life.
So. Oh, Soul Quest, a Trail Guide to Life. And she also has her doctorate in theology and anthropology. So come on up, Pam.
Yeah.
So glad to have you.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Got to find my Bible passage here. I got to. Well, it's great to be here with you, brave souls. Here we are today. So thank you for coming out. And this morning is going to be a continuation of the light that we've been talking about. And I love that this is the fellowship of the inner light, because light, sun, solar, corona, moon, all going to be part of this talk, and the Transfiguration as well, which we know the story about that, but I'm going to read it to us anyway. So here's the story of the Transfiguration, which the church, the wider church around the world, celebrated about a month ago. And this is from Matthew 17, 1 through 9. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up to a high mountain apart. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 booths here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, lo, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell flat on their faces and were filled with fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. For invocation this morning, I want to share with you a poem honoring our Native American brothers and sisters. It's called Singing Forth the Sun. Early in the cool morn hours, early before the waking of the sky, early while the day yet sleeps, Navajo and Lakota, Cree and Ojibwe, the many people of the land, arise to sing forth the sun. Like a morning sacrifice of praise, it is a duty to sing forth the sun. It is a prayer and a need like breath to know the universe awaits you to sing forth the sun. In a time of waiting, when the dawn will come as surely as the night, in a time of waiting, it is a duty and a prayer to sing forth the sun. So, grab my notes here. There was this group of frogs They're a family of frogs, and they got too big. They got too big for where they were living. So they decided they were going to go cross the meadow and find a bigger, better place for them to be. So they all started out on their journey, and halfway there, they came to a huge hole in the ground, and 2 of the older frogs fell in. Now, you know, I used to tell this 35 years ago, this joke, and now that I'm older, I'm thinking this isn't so far-fetched. So anyway, the 2 older frogs fell in, and the younger ones are all around the rim, and it's too deep for them to jump in and help pull out the frogs. So they watch as the frogs jump up and down, trying to get out themselves. And finally, one of the older frogs just works so hard to get up and jump, and finally just lays down and croaks. Sorry. So I know you would like that. So then the other one, everyone's going, oh my gosh, the older one's never going to get out. And so they start gathering around, yelling, just go down, lie down and die like your friend. And to their amazement, the frog's leaping up even higher. And they're just yelling at him, oh, give up already. And the frog is leaping higher and higher and higher. And the old frog finally leaps right out of the hole. And everyone gathers around saying, what happened? How did this happen? And the old frog, it turns out, was deaf. And all the while they were telling him to lay down and die, he thought they were cheering him on. And I think that's kind of the attitude that we need these days. It doesn't really have to do with the sermon, but I had to start with a good joke. So this morning is about, I wanted to say too, interesting as I was doing my research for this sermon, I thought of coronavirus, corona. Well, besides, I think there's a beer. I don't know if there's a beer. But the only time I ever use corona is when I think about the ring around the sun. And so that made me start thinking. And so I did some research, and the name COVID-19, CO stands for corona, VI stands for virus, D stands for disease, and the 19 stands for the year 2019 that it came forth. And so the virus, I've seen pictures of it online. I can't believe they have all this information. And it's a circle, and it has little spikes all around it, kind of like a crown, which is the Latin word for crown, corona. So we're going to start looking at light and sun in a few different ways this morning. And first of all is the Transfiguration story, because it's one of the most important, I think, in this church year in Jesus' life. And in our modern day age, we might say, oh, that was an old wives' tale, or we might still believe there was some kind of amazing thing that happened, a miracle, or some kind of amazing thing that we don't understand how it happened. For when I was younger, for many, many decades, I thought that the Transfiguration happened at night. Why is that? Because Jesus shone like the sun, and I figured that is where you can really see the sun the most, is when it's dark. It would be amazing. He was radiant, many translations say. And so I realized, no, it was broad daylight, and Jesus was still brighter than anything. He was as bright as the sun. So the Spirit is so good brought me a wonderful resource in this magazine called The Parabola. And in it is an article by Brian Swim. I don't know if many of you know him. He's a cosmologist and been around for a long time. And cosmology is the study of the origins of the universe and the development of the universe. And in this article, which is taken from his new book, just written, and it's called The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, Humanity and the New Story, meaning the new story of creation. So he talks about light in this article. He talks about the old ways we used to think of light, and then the newer ways, which I had just gotten used to, of light is both a particle and a wave, and it depends on different factors which way it is. But I was still with the old view of when the sun is out there and the moon is here, the sun sends its particles to the moon, and then they bounce off the moon, and then the rays come out to us as moonlight. And that was what I was understanding. And he says, no, now we have a new understanding about what is happening with these photons. And it's so good that I want to read it to you, because I also don't want to make a mistake about the science that he mentions here. So he's saying that even if we don't see the atoms and the protons as static, but we see them as vibrating, that isn't accurate either, because even at an extreme rate, you still think of an object that vibrates back and forth. So he says, rather, as scientists discovered in the 20th century, particles exist in one location and then exist in another location without crossing the space in between. So, as bewildering as that sounds, it's utterly accurately scientific to say that the particles and atoms are flashing into existence, surging into existence, and then just as suddenly they dissolve back into the darkness, ready to surge again forward in a nearby location or a distant location. And so the moon is not a dead object. The moon is an ongoing, scintillating event. Now, I don't know about you, but I grew up thinking it's pretty much a dead rock up there reflecting the light. And the terms that Brian uses for this whole universe cosmos theory now is the all-nourishing abyss. All-nourishing coming from the generative creative space, the void, we might call it. There are many other names we could call it. Paul Tillich, the theologian, called it the ground of being. It's all nourishing. So there's a hint of love there, or it seems to me. And then the second word is abyss. That kind of has a more negative connotation, but to him it means the void, the abyss. And so this is what he continues to say. This interaction is not thinking of photons bouncing the way a ball bounces when thrown against a wall. Instead, the photons from the sun interact with the particles of the moon, and this interaction begins with the annihilation of the particles from the sun into the moon, and then new sets of photons are emitted. And these photons are brand new, he claims, the scientists claim. So it is not true to say that the photons of light arriving here have just bounced from the sun. Moonlight comes from the moon. And I love this, he says, the moon in the days of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, he thinks, will understand the moonlight as expressive of the moon's reality. The moon will be seen as its own creative source, an origin of the universe, a geyser that sprays moonlight into the night sky. I love that image. So anyway, light, it's just so difficult to even put our minds around some of these things. But if we focus on Jesus somehow being so full of light, whether it's getting in and absorbed into the all-nourishing abyss or whatever is happening, he's being beamed down like in Star Trek, and the other two men come to be with him, Moses and, Elijah. And Moses being the leader of the Jews, ancient Hebrews, and Elijah, their famous favorite prophet. And during this time when politics has really taken a back seat, which is very interesting to me, Peter is a good marketer, though, if not a good politician. He says, hey, Jesus, you know what we can do? I can put up some booths here so people can come by and they can pay homage here. And we can, I don't think he'd ever say take some money unless it was to give to the poor. But anyway, Peter's on the lookout for a marketing alternative until a huge cloud, a light-filled cloud, comes over and they hear the voice of the divine saying words that we heard at when? Jesus' baptism with John the Baptist, right? This is my beloved son, listen to him. Except now we're at the end of Jesus' ministry, not at the beginning. We're at the end where he's turned his face to Jerusalem, and even right now we are in the period of Lent when he is walking towards his crucifixion. Well, when the disciples hear this voice, they fall down on the ground, scared to death, as I'm sure we all would be by this sight. And then Jesus says to them, in the words that are most used in the Bible, the words "fear not" have been used more than any phrase in the Bible, fear not. And then he tells them they can get up and go with him. Now, this is the second piece that I want us to look at, is kind of our inner cosmos this morning. Our inner cosmos. Where does creation often take place for us? In our minds. And it takes place in imagination as well, of course. And I'm not sure where we would locate that. But how many of you have heard of the science of neuro-linguistic programming? A couple of you. Okay, so you're pretty well familiar with it. Well, Jesus says, fear not in Aramaic or Hebrew, not English. When I was a little kid, I thought Jesus spoke English. I think, didn't we all? He says, fear not. Well, one of the main things that really hit me when years ago, a couple decades now, neuro-linguistic programming was being studied by my friends, and they said to me, we're going to do an experiment. Okay, I'm going to ask all of you to think of an elephant. Okay, I want you to think of an elephant right now. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to not think of an elephant. And what are you thinking of? An elephant. An elephant. An elephant. So it seems, this is just a simple example, but it seems as though the not doesn't mean much to our minds, to our unconscious. When we're told not to think of something, we think of it. And so here's a pastor for all these years, when I started thinking about that and the Lord's Prayer, I said, wait a minute, Jesus, can you teach me anything about what's going on here? Because there are 2 lines in the Lord's Prayer that use the word not. So, first one is, lead us not into temptation. So what are we thinking about when we say that, if not for a long period, but temptation? And deliver us from evil. So don't let us go into evil. So 2 not words. So I thought, oh my gosh, what does this mean then? And it started me really praying and thinking about, of course, the Lord's Prayer means everything to so many millions of people around the world for the last 2,000 years. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what in a new consciousness as we're evolving might be more helpful or helpful in a different way than the Lord's Prayer. Those two lines at least. And so I started thinking, well, Jesus, if we don't want to think about what you don't want us to go into or to do, temptation, evil, what do you want us to do? Where do you want to lead us? So what can you think of? This isn't a rhetorical question. Where can you think Jesus is leading us or would like to lead us into? Love. Sure. What else?
Light.
Mm-hmm. Light? Life? Yeah.
Heaven on earth.
Heaven on earth, which is part of the prayer, for sure, already. Compassion. Joy. Yes. These are things, as I was working and praying with this and meditating, that I said, oh, those are the power words of what I could give my energy to build, as opposed to leaving and fleeing with fear. And we all know, I can't resist telling this true story, that when I was young, I loved TV had just come out, so don't think back of how old I am, but I'm in good company here. And black and white. And I loved all the black and white Hollywood movies. Oh my gosh, so I wanted to be an actress. And so when I was 4, I just wanted to be an actress so much that every night when we prayed with my dad and mom and my other 3 sisters, I'd say, "Our Father, who art in heaven, Hollywood be thy name." Who knows Hallowed as a 4-year-old? Nobody knows what that means. Still don't know. So anyway, words are important. And words are our creative tools. Words are our gifts. Words are where creation happens, or our thinking, thinking, and then comes the physical creation. And so we have this incredible light within us, and we have this incredible light all around us and without us, outside of us. And I want to close with a true story that shows the healing power of light and love. All the dimensions we mentioned about it, I believe, are in the power of light, joy and healing and love and compassion and courage and all the good things we can think of. So this story comes from a book by Rachel Remen. She's an MD, and it's called Kitchen Table Wisdom. Her grandfather was a rabbi, and she was very touched and close to him and moved by him. She faced a death-dealing illness for many years of her young life, even into young adulthood, but she managed to come through and get her MD. And then she decided she wanted to practice by doing counseling with those who had life-threatening illnesses in a hospital so that she could give back, and because she'd been there, the wounded healer kind of idea. And so she was in her office when the staff member came by and said, "Hey, we'd really like you to go look at," we'll call him Tom, because he's a young 18-year-old, and he's just graduated from high school. He had his whole life planned. He was star on the football team. He had a scholarship to a university. His whole life was just beautiful, planned out for him. And he found out he had cancer in his leg, and we had to amputate his leg. And he is really suffering with depression. Could you stop by and see him, Rachel? And she said, of course. So she went by to see him. She took along her paper and crayons that she had used in her sessions. And she talked with him, "Tom, how are you feeling?" And of course, he didn't even want to talk to her. He was so angry at life, angry at God, if he believed in God, just so angry. And she said, "Well, if you can't talk to me about it, can you draw me how you're feeling?" And she gave him a piece of paper. And he took a black crayon and he drew a vase. He said, "See that vase? That's my life." And then he took the crayon and he went zigzag like that. Big crack down it. He said, "And now there's nothing left in my life. There is no light and there is no life." And he turned back away from her and threw the paper down. Well, Rachel took that back and kept doing her work, kept trying to see Tom and talk with him. And slowly Tom started to ease up and get a little curious, leave his room. He got a prosthetic. He started walking around the halls of the hospital. And he heard about a young woman who had just had cancer in her throat. And she was, wouldn't you know it, a singer, a beautiful singer who had her life all planned out. And so now Tom was going around pretty regularly visiting young people who had had life-devastating news, and the staff were using him. So he decided to go see this young woman. He goes in to see her, and she just says, "Get away from me." She turns around, her back to him, and he tries to talk with her. No, nothing. He goes back day after day, and nothing would get her to turn around and look at him. And finally, this bold young man takes off his prosthetic, and he starts hopping around the room, and he bumps into the garbage can, and that startles her. So she turns around and sees him with one leg there, hopping around and dancing a jig, and she starts laughing. And she says, "Well, I guess if you can dance, I can learn to sing again." And so, I don't know if she learned to sing, but she came out of her depression, and wouldn't you know it, they fell in love, and they got married, and they kept the ministry going especially to young people, who had had their future blasted apart by illness. So then Tom comes in a few years later to see Rachel, and he's just glowing. And she says, and before he leaves, "Hey, wait a minute." And she gets out the picture of the vase with a black gouge across it. She gives it to him and says, "Do you remember this that you drew?" And he goes, "Yes. But wait a minute." He reaches over and he grabs a yellow crayon, and he goes like this all over the picture. And then he says, "Rachel, I was wrong. That isn't where the light disappeared. That's where the light broke through." So this is the promise that we all have in some way or another of this incredible light that is around us and within us, and that we are called to share with one another. Let us pray. O beloved, who art in heaven, holy be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy desire be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our nourishing bread. Help us to forgive ourselves and others. Open our eyes in mindfulness, our hearts in deep compassion. Lead us in paths of goodness and kindness. Deliver us into joy. For thine is the kingdom of love, the power of healing, and the glory of a new creation, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.